A bit of social news from the Washington Post this morning, and at the top of the hour on your screen is Michael Shermer in Denver. Good morning, Professor Shermer.
Good morning.
How did you get interested in all these conspiracies from 9/11?
Well, I'm the publisher of Skeptic Magazine and a columnist for Scientific American for the Skeptic, and we investigate weird claims. I mean, sort of things that are out there on the fringes. And about 2 years ago, when I was doing a public address, I was approached by one of these 9/11 conspiracy theorists that wanted to ask me about a couple of things, and I'd not heard much about it other than there was this weird French book, The Big Lie. And this guy wanted to know about explosives that brought down the World Trade Center. I said, what are you talking about? And so I never for the life of me imagined that this conspiracy theory would get legs in America. I mean, Americans like conspiracy theories for sure. I mean, the whole JFK conspiracy theory never seems to go away. But this one is particularly odd because, on the one hand, most of the people who formulate the 9/11 conspiracy theories think Bush is an incompetent boob that can hardly tie his shoes, let alone be the president. And on the other hand, he's supposed to have been so competent he pulled off the greatest conspiracy of all time, orchestrating all these different events and just perfectly pulling it off. That to me just seemed absurd. And yet, here it is. This week, I've probably done 24 interviews on this subject. People seem to want to know something about it. There's this video that's been getting a lot of play. So it's out there. It's become part of pop culture now.
Any of those theories that you've heard of at all have any credence?
Well, no, frankly. You'd think there might be something useful in it, other than as an education to those of us that don't know much about, say, the demolition of buildings and why buildings fall, for example. You know, that's other than that, no, there's no credence to it at all. All of their claims are spurious. I mean, they start off saying that the World Trade Center was brought down by demolition bombs, but in fact, demolition experts have done an analysis of this, and other architectural experts have done an analysis of why the buildings fell. Buildings fall in demolition explosions from the bottom up. This is how it's done. They start the explosives from the bottom and they work their way up, and the thing collapses straight down in its own footprint. The World Trade Center building, it started its collapse at the very point of impact where the planes hit. So clearly there was no demolition bombs going off. And they have this video showing, well, we all have seen the videos of the buildings collapsing, but they claim if you blow it up you can see little puffs of smoke that look like little squib explosions. Well, in fact, what it is that the building is coming down and the air pressure inside is pushing puffs of smoke out, and so that's what causes it to look like that.
What gives you the authority? I'm not sure you're asking for authority, but what gives you an insight to all this, that you debunk all this versus the people that are in favor of the idea of these conspiracies?
Oh, well, this is, you know, what I do for a living is investigate conspiracy theories and fringes that are on the claims that are on the fringes, and I'm not an expert on any of the particular subjects that are involved with this, but, you know, I can do research, and that's what we did. We talked to, you know, explosive experts and others that have done a lot of research on this, like the Popular Mechanics folks who also have a book out now about this on 9/11 conspiracies. And you know, so say, for example, they take it, and it isn't rocket science. You don't have to be all that smart to figure this out. Like, one of them is that a cruise missile hit the Pentagon. Well, what happened to the plane? The American Airlines flight that disappeared at the moment that the explosion was seen at the Pentagon. Well, so to get around that, the conspiracy theorists say, well, the flight actually went on to Cleveland, where it landed, or it was Chicago. It landed in Chicago, they said. The passengers were taken off and then gassed in a gas chamber. I mean, just simple logic tells you what's more likely. I mean, at the very moment that the explosion happened, the plane disappeared off the radar screen, so they would have had to use some stealth technology to make the plane disappear off the radar screen. And then fly it continually, and no one ever saw that it was continuing on to Chicago, and then landing without anyone noticing, and then gassing all those passengers. And in any case, think of all the people that would have to be involved to pull off even just that particular part of 9/11. Not one of them wants to go on Larry King Live or the evening news, or come out with a best-selling book, or go to People magazine with the scoop of the century. Not one of them. This is the problem with all conspiracy theories, is the leakage problem. People can't keep their mouth shut. You see from all the political pundits that half the people that are yakking on about the Iraq War on these talk shows are former Bush administration people. So people can't keep their mouth shut. They can't wait till after they leave. They can't wait to come out with a book and a tell-all story about what they heard and saw on the inside. It seems so unlikely that something like this could have been pulled off, and then everybody who was involved kept their mouth shut. That's just absurd.
One of the big conspiracy charges is that Tower 7 up there at in New York at the World Trade Center came down 5-something in the afternoon, and there was no reason for it to come down. What do you say about that one?
Right. Tower 7 is one of the big sticking points for the 9/11 conspiracy people. Well, in fact, the firefighters and police and rescue people and demolition people and so on were all there watching it burn. It burned all day long. They knew it was going to come down. They, in fact, moved everybody away from trying to fight the fires because they knew that it was going to come down, and they sat there and watched it come down. It came down just as predicted from the damage of the fires burning all day. The falling debris from the World Trade Center, Towers 1 and 2, caused considerable collateral damage to the buildings around there, including the Building 7. And this, in fact, counteracts their previous claim that the World Trade Centers 1 and 2 came down in a perfect footprint. No, they didn't. In fact, had it been a demolition, bottom-up explosives collapse, they would have come straight down, but they didn't. Quite a bit of the debris flew off to the side as the top part of the building came down and met resistance in the middle floors, which did collapse, but there the debris flew out to the sides and caused collateral damage. Then that caused eventually Building 7 to fall. So it actually wasn't, there was nothing unusual at the time. Nobody thought how unusual it was for that building to fall. They knew it was going to fall.
Our guest was a college professor for 20 years, taught psychology, evolution, and the history of the science of Occidental College in California. He's got a book out, and that's part of the reason he's in Denver right now on a book tour. It's called Why Darwin Matters by Michael Shermer. The case against intelligent design, but that's not why we have him on the program this morning. He also is a graduate of Pepperdine University, where he got a BA in psychology, a master's in experimental psychology from California State University at Fullerton, and a PhD in history of science from Claremont Graduate School. Let me go to the phones, Professor Shermer, and we'll find out what our audience wants to talk about. And we encourage people who are those who believe in the conspiracy theories to give us a call and ask Michael Shermer why you're not correct. Let's go first up here to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You're on the air.
Good morning. Professor Shermer, thank you for being on the show. I wanted to ask you just commented about World Trade Center 7, but first I wanted to ask you, just in your opinion, you talked about the puff of smoke or the squibs. I saw pictures in videos showing steel columns being launched underneath the collapse of the building, and I just wanted to ask, besides the air pressure, what would cause that?
Cause the what? What to happen?
There were columns of steel when the building was coming down that were launched actually hundreds of yards away from the building.
I've never seen that. I've never seen that. No, there were this film that everybody's downloading, Loose Change. They do show some objects flying out. They're people that jumped. It's not pieces of steel.
Deer Park.
They got that wrong.
Deer Park, Illinois, a Democrat. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. I would just like to say, where is the proof for the official story? They hustled all the evidence, all the steel out. Any crime scene, they examined things. Things were hustled out. Who profits from a crime is the military-industrial complex. And the biggest thing is, if America was under attack by unknown forces, Bush was at a well-publicized event. Why did the Secret Service not hustle him immediately away from the scene? He was there for like 30 minutes. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's called the dog that did not bark. Thank you.
There's a lot to unpack in that one. Well, first of all, the debris at World Trade Center 1 was not hurried out and sent off to China as this movie says. This is where this guy's getting this stuff. In fact, it took, as we all remember, it took months and months and months to clean it all up. All the debris was gone through by experts. None of the experts, including demolition experts that helped with the cleanup, none of them found any squibs or explosives or anything like that. There was no evidence at all, not a shred of evidence that there was something unusual in the collapse there. And if there were, don't you think one of these firemen would have said something? Or one of the police or any of the other people that were there? Not one of them noticed something unusual, or let's say they all saw something unusual and they all kept their mouths shut. This is the absurdity of this. And as for Bush, you know, he was, at this little school reading, doing a reading program thing, and he was informed initially of the first impact, as we all were on the news, and we all thought the same thing. It was just some freak accident, and it wasn't even clear that it was a 747 initially. So the idea that he should have been hustled off within minutes is hindsight, and this is what's largely going on with all these claims, the hindsight bias. Since we know, even with normal criticisms of Bush for 9/11. It's the hindsight bias that since we know what happened, we can look back and say, why didn't they know back in August that Osama bin Laden was going to do this? And why didn't they anticipate this? And why didn't they shoot down the jets that morning? And so on. This assumes perfect knowledge of what we know now on that particular day. In fact, not just that day, that morning, that hour, that minute that the news started to coming through, that they would know, everybody would know everything that was going on that we know now, and of course they didn't.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for Michael Shermer. You're on the air.
Good morning to both of you. I'd like to recommend a good book titled The Terror Timeline and a documentary called Hijacking Catastrophe and another one, 9/11 Press for Truth. But there are several questions that I want answered that everybody has forgotten. Who warned members of the Pentagon not to fly? Newsweek reported that they were warned and they canceled their reservations on September 10th. Who warned Salman Rushdie not to fly? Who also told Willie Brown not to fly, which was reported in the San Francisco Chronicle? We can talk about missiles and the buildings, and controlled demolitions all day. There are some simple answers for the questions I just asked. Who sold stock short before 9/11 and hasn't been tracked or prosecuted? When we can find a 16-year-old internet hacker. I want these things answered. I'm tired of the obfuscation, just like the 9/11 Whitewash Commission was guilty of. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. I can see everybody truly has been watching this video. This is all coming straight out of this video. As a general counter to this, let me recommend that viewers go to skeptic.com, where we have on our homepage there a big analysis of 9/11 and all of these particular claims. And even more thoroughly, Popular Mechanics has a complete 9/11 analysis. And the editors of Popular Mechanics have a book out about this that addresses every one of those claims. In general, here's the story, that most of these things are not true. That is, certain members of the Pentagon were told not to fly, or even worse, that Jews were told to stay home that morning. The Salman Rushdie thing is just particularly bizarre. I mean, he has a death sentence put on him by the Muslim community. Why would they spare him? And if it's not them, why would the Bush administration care about Salman Rushdie, for gosh sakes? Willie Brown was told not to stay home. What, Willie Brown, San Francisco? Who cares? What has this got to do with anything? And most of these things turn out not even to be true. I mean, the put options on airline stock, not true. There was nothing unusual at all. Somebody looked into this, and but it's not true. So a lot of the things that are put out on this video and some of these books, I'm sorry to say, they're just outright lies or falsehoods, or they're just untrue facts. So that's part of the problem fueling the conspiracy theory.
We covered the Terror Timeline author Paul Thompson earlier the week at the National Press Club. I want to run a clip of what he has to say and get your comment on that.
So there was a Newsweek story, it came out just after 9/11, saying that there were a number of high-level generals that were going to fly that next morning, and that they were given a warning and told not to fly on the morning of September 11th. And then the Newsweek article went on to say, doubtless this is going to become a big issue because, why is it that these people were warned, but, the people on the planes that were hijacked weren't given the same warning? And there was no such debate. And then the next issue of Newsweek, they basically repeated that exact same story, and again kind of said that doubtless this will lead to some kind of debate, and again kind of just completely fell on deaf ears. So, this is not, you're not a conspiracy theorist if you just look at the newspaper and you said, I read this in Newsweek, I read this in, the New York Times and so forth, and I want answers. I want the 9/11 Commission, for instance, to have looked into that Newsweek story and tried to figure out what was going on there. But that was just one of the 70% of the questions that the victims' relatives asked and never got answers to.
Michael Shermer?
Okay, well, first of all, the news press stories, the news coverage of the events as they unfolded and in the weeks after and so on, they don't necessarily always get the story right. I mean, there's rumors and rumors of rumors, and perhaps, I mean, obviously on any given day, people cancel flights, plans change, orders are given not to fly here but go there, or stay there for some other reason. Don't forget there were some military training exercises and programs going on 9/11. So these could have easily had, any of these plans could have easily had something to do with those. And then after the fact, we look for anomalies and then try to fit them into a conspiracy theory. Here's what happens in general, is that no theory of anything explains all the facts. In science, this is called the residue problem. There's always a residue of unexplained anomalies that the primary theory that everyone accepts can't explain. What people do on the fringes is they take those anomalies and they try to construct a whole new theory, but the new theory doesn't explain all the old facts that the old theory explains just fine. So we've got there's sort of a principle of parsimony here, that the most salient theory that explains the most facts is the one we should accept, even if there are still some unsolved mysteries, which is perfectly okay. We have to have a certain tolerance for ambiguity. We can't explain everything. But the fact is that, for example, Al-Qaeda and Osama said that they did it. They already tried to blow up the World Trade Center building in 1993. Why don't we take them at their word that this is, in fact, indeed what happened? Not only are they not denying it, they're proud of it. They'd do it again in a heartbeat. They're trying to do it again. So I think that's the obvious, most parsimonious explanation.
Michael Shermer in Denver this morning. We go next to Jackson, Ohio. You're on the air.
Good morning. My question is about Flight 93. The story is that that aircraft was shot down by the Air Force on the orders of President Bush. And my single question about that is, why was one of the engines found almost two football fields away? No theory that I've ever heard, other than having shot it down, could explain that fact.
Well, the debris field, of course, is going to be somewhat scattered. Actually, I'm surprised to hear you say that. A couple hundred yards is nothing. The official conspiracy theory is that parts of the plane were found miles away, which is not true. The debris field was not miles long. But a plane going 550 miles an hour when it hits is, of course, going to be scattered somewhat. And where does most of the debris go? It disintegrates. The plane, most of what a plane is made out of is aluminum, which if it burns, it melts, or if it doesn't burn, it fragments into millions of little pieces. I know a friend of mine was at the Pentagon when the plane hit, and he walked out there. There were pieces of American Airlines flight. He picked up tiny pieces. There weren't much left. Wasn't much left except for the big pieces of the engine that were on the lawn. I mean, some of the conspiracy theories say there was no parts of the American Airlines flight at the Pentagon. Yes, there were. There's pictures of it. You can see it. In fact, if you go to the Popular Mechanics, they have a picture of the engine sitting right there on the lawn. And well, where'd all the bodies go? You know, we couldn't find any bodies. There are no bodies left after a plane crash. It's a rather gruesome subject to cover, but basically bodies just disintegrate into just thousands of little pieces of, meat, basically protein, chunks of meat. I mean, it's pretty disgusting. It's why the forensic people have to do DNA analysis to figure out who the subjects are in a plane crash like that. It's very, very tragic. But that's why the debris field looks like it does.
Our guest is the founding publisher of Skeptics magazine. He's done that since 1991. Also has been a professor. Let's go to Washington, D.C. next. You're on the air.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
Good morning to all. What I wanted to do is make an observation and ask a question. What I'm observing is that instead of calling this him debunking the 9/11 theories, what it sounds like is him making excuses and poking fun at everything that's being brought up. He says that World Trade Center number 7 went down because of fire, and everybody knew it. Therefore, there was nothing there to see. But I would like to know what other building, maybe 2 buildings, have ever went down because of fire. Also, I would like to say that that because Operation Northwoods, which is a well-publicized operation that went on, I think, in the 60s, why is it so ridiculous to believe that this is out of the realm of something that can be done, being as though it is an actual fact? What he's actually doing is just saying, oh, well, why would somebody do that? Or this is crazy, or getting that from the film.
Thanks, caller. Got the point. Mr. Shermer.
Yep. Well, okay, so the 9/11 conspiracy theorists say that no buildings ever collapsed due to fire. Not true. It's just simply not true. That's a lie. There's plenty of buildings that have collapsed due to fires. And the video that they shows the building on one side, and it doesn't look like much of it's burning. And they go, look, hardly any of it's burning. Yeah, but if you look at the video from the other side, the whole thing is up in flames. So that's also deceptive. And then finally, I'm not just poking fun of it. I'm asking a serious question. I'm asking a what's more likely question, that the building fell due to damage caused by fires, which have happened before, and all the people who were standing there knew it was going to collapse and moved away, in fact, or that people went into that building and planted bombs and brought it down, and not one of those people has come forward. Like, if you're out there now, give us a call right now and tell us, yeah, I'm the guy, I planted the bombs. And then see what happens. I mean, this is indicative clearly that there is no conspiracy, because people can't keep their mouths shut. I was once on G. Gordon Liddy's show, a radio show in Washington, D.C. there, and this was for my first book, Why People Believe Weird Things, and I have some stuff about conspiracy theories in there. I said, well, let me ask you, you're the man who knows a lot about conspiracies. It's not that conspiracies are impossible. They do happen. I mean, Watergate was a conspiracy. And he said the biggest problem with conspiracies, particularly government conspiracies, is government bureaucrats are not very competent, and they can't keep their mouths shut. So imagine, and that would be for a small conspiracy. Look what happened, like with Watergate. This is just a handful of guys, just a very quiet, tiny little thing, just a break-in to get some information, not the collapse of the World Trade Center. And that whole thing blew up, and everybody found out about it. What are the chances that something 100-fold greater than Watergate could have been pulled off and nobody noticed?
Talking with Michael Shermer. Bob Novak will be our guest at the top of the hour. We go to Orlando, Florida. A George Bush supporter. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. One of the things that concerns me, and you've been in education for a long time, is whether it's a politician, professors. If you talk to students today, everyone, whether they're for or against the president of the war, 9/11, whatever, everything is so emotional, and with all the knowledge out there, we have seemed to have abandoned logic and reason. Do you see that as a trend? And if so, then what in the world can we do to change it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question, and that's spot on correct. It's the biggest problem we encounter. I mean, we are a Skeptic Society as a science organization, and the whole problem of critical thinking is huge in this country. People are swept up by emotions, particularly when it comes to religion and politics. People are emotionally invested in their positions and beliefs. People on the left and the right, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody are committed to their positions. That makes it very difficult to think critically and clearly about evidence. We are not natural scientists. We are natural pattern-seeking animals. We look for and find connections. We connect the dots like constellations in the sky. We find the constellations of meaning in our complex, chaotic world, and it's discomforting for us to think that, say, 19 people could pull off this incredible thing. There's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance, like if I can make an analogy with the JFK assassination. Here's the leader of the free world, the most powerful man in the world, is killed by some nobody, some nutcase, some wingnut living in the nooks and crannies of society, and no one noticed him? And the answer is, yeah, that's the very person, in fact, the only person that could pull off something like that. Because he's invisible in a free democratic society like that, you can get away with it. A huge FBI, CIA, mafia, Castro, so on, conspiracy could never be pulled off. Too many people, too complex, too much incompetence, the whole thing was too visible and would fail. Same thing here, but orders of magnitude bigger. What's more likely, that a huge government agency could pull this off, or 19 guys, invisible, living in the nooks and crannies of society? And we have all their flight records of them training and so on, only after the fact. No one really noticed at the time what was coming. That's who could pull this off. That's the very people that could pull this off. Invisible in a free society, that's how it happens.
Well, your experience, do people start out skeptical in the first place about things like 9/11, and they find the theories that help them, with their own basic attitude toward it, or do they wait for films like the one you were talking about?
Yeah, I think what happens is these things get usually through some alternative media, and thanks to the internet, it fuels these things. I mean, look, we have to be in favor of free speech. The internet's the greatest thing since the printing press, but we also have to put up with the fact that goofy stuff is going to get printed as well and passed down as fact. So I watched this video. It's about an hour and a half. It's a bit of a commitment to sit there and watch it, and it gets so many things wrong, but it's compelling enough that if you didn't know much about this stuff, and who does? I mean, I didn't know anything about why buildings fall and what happens to people's bodies when the planes hit the ground. Why should any of us know anything about that? But when you look into it, you realize, oh, well, they lied, or they got this wrong, or more what happens is they string together a series of anomalous facts that on the surface look rather peculiar. And so you'll notice what most of your callers are doing is asking, I want facts, I want explanations, I want to know what's the answer to these questions. So they don't the documentary that everyone's talking about doesn't have any answers, really doesn't have very many answers. They're mostly questions. Their ultimate answer is, Bush did it. And, as I said at the top, I mean, this is the guy that's supposed to be the most incompetent boob to ever be in the White House. And at the same time, he's supposed to be the most incredibly genius orchestrator of the greatest conspiracy of all time. I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't be a Bush critic and then also say he's that competent.
Glen Arden, Maryland, you're on the air.
Yes, we can be that way, both ways, because the great deceiver will be just that, the great deceiver. He's going to fool everybody, and it's been written. My conspiracy theory, though, goes along with that. I didn't see that film you said, 911, whatever it was, online. But I did have a question about the stock puts that no one has been bought in, because that shows prior knowledge. Also, but my conspiracy theory is those helicopters that were stationed at different angles around that to give us the Hollywood production, showing those planes coming in before they knew. How did those helicopters know not to be in the flight path of either of the planes? But when the first one hit and then the second one was coming in, that it seems as the helicopters were filming from two different angles, and it was a camera on the ground. And, somebody had prior knowledge. This is all I'm saying. So, and one other thing, people keep saying we weren't attacked after 9/11. Well, we were. And a month later, there was the anthrax attacks. No one has ever been caught, which means there's a terrorist loose in this country. It was traced back to Fort Detrick, which means the government had a course. The government had to let this stuff out. So it's to further terrorize the American public. I think that has something to do with the 9/11, along with the helicopters being there waiting to see these planes come in.
Thanks, caller. Mr. Shermer.
Yeah, I always like this one about what's the motive of the Bush administration. It's to orchestrate the American people to get behind the war. Well, we saw how well that worked. Country is completely divided over the war. In any case, recall that the only video we have of the first plane impact is a camera crew who is with a fire crew in New York, and the guy is filming the fireman standing there, and you can hear the jet flying right overhead, and the camera swings over and barely catches it as it impacts. It was just a complete lucky a video clip, and that's the only one we have of the first impact. After the first impact, of course, everybody scrambles their news crews and camera crews and helicopters, and so we have multiple angles, not the best, but multiple angles of the second impact. In fact, if you wanted the perfect video angle for the second impact, we don't have that. Usually what we see is the one from the opposite side, the north side, in which you see the plane coming in from behind and then it comes out the other end. There's only one halfway decent one from the actual impact side, and it's not even that good. So your caller's statement is just, I'm sorry, it's just not true. And in any case, the chances of the helicopters being hit by the plane coming in are pretty slim. The airspace is quite open. So that answers those, I think.
Birdsboro, Pennsylvania. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Shermer. I just want to give you one factual note that I want to mention one name. This concerns the Pentagon theory. I want to mention one name, Barbara Olson.
Okay.
What about her? What about Barbara Olson?
She was on the plane. That was the Solicitor General's wife at the time.
Ted Olson. And what does that have to do with, what do you think that means?
Well, where is she now? She used to come on TV. She used to be a pundit on certain television shows. So where is she? She hasn't, surfaced at all. So she was on
what's
that
the point?
flight. Excuse me?
Are you someone that doesn't believe in it, the conspiracy theory, or do you think she has something?
I really don't. I mean, it's just a bunch of hogwash.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I see. I see where he's going. Okay, yeah, and this does bring up another issue: is what happened to all the people if the planes weren't actually shot down, or they were? Again, Bush is criticized for not shooting down the planes if they knew that it was coming, and yet on the other hand, he supposedly shot down Flight 93. But what happened to all those passengers? Okay, well or it was a jet, a missile that hit the Pentagon, and the plane went somewhere else. But wait, where did all the people go? Well, they were gassed or whatever. But what about those cell phone calls on all those flights, and particularly Flight 93? So according to the conspiracy theory, and here's where it really gets goofy, is that the CIA has technology to take somebody's voice, a recording, and then duplicate, if you have enough of it, if you have a few minutes of the person's voice, duplicate it through this machine and then construct entire conversations of that. So are we to understand that somehow the CIA got recordings of all those people on the plane and then constructed conversations and then called their family members and held entire conversations, and not one of the family members has come forward to say, it didn't really sound like my John or my Mary. Nothing of that has happened. So that's just really weird.
Next call, Fort Ann, New York, a Democrat, for Michael Shermer. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Shermer. I'm a little skeptical about your rebuttal. You're pretty much just saying it would be hard to do and sounds crazy. I'm new at looking at some of these theories, and one thing that struck me, I read about some of the supposed hijackers are alive. So I went to the BBC website, and indeed there are 3 of them there that have been interviewed by the BBC, and the FBI or CIA or whoever would do it has never changed their information that these are the part of the 19 who did it, and 3 of them are alive in the Middle East. What would you say to that? And
I would.
BBC is relatively a legitimate source.
Certainly, I've heard this. I've checked with the BBC. This is, as far as I know, this is absolutely not true. In fact, supposedly Mohammed Atta gave an interview after 9/11. Impossible. He was on the plane. Where is he? Where are these guys? And this film and these references to the BBC claim that they've given interviews to the BBC, but why have we not ever seen this in the media? Why have these interviews never been broadcast? Where are these people? I've heard the stories like what you just said. I've never seen it myself. I've gone to the BBC site. I didn't see that. I know people that have called the BBC to ask them. They've said, no, absolutely not. There were no interviews like that. So I think this is one of those urban legend type tales that have been told and retold without any factual basis.
Are these conspiracy theories, are they more than they normally are on events in this country, or how does this, for instance, how does this compare to the John F. Kennedy's conspiracy theory group?
Well, it's similar in the fact that, you know, the people involved are emotionally committed. I think because 9/11 is orders of magnitude bigger than, well, anything that's happened since Pearl Harbor, that people are especially emotionally invested. But since I mentioned Pearl Harbor, let's not forget that immediately after Pearl Harbor, there were conspiracy theories about how Roosevelt knew about the attacks, Churchill knew about the attacks, Churchill and Roosevelt orchestrated the attacks, or they allowed the attacks to happen to galvanize the American people into the war. Very similar kinds of arguments. It's almost like an archetype of conspiracy story construction. This is what you are to say, this is what you are to do. I don't think anybody's orchestrated that, of course, but it's part of how the human mind, after the fact, goes back and reasons how it should have been anticipated. Since it wasn't, they must have known secretly that it was going to happen. But we always have to remember that in the present time, it's so difficult to know. You know, as Yogi Berra said, the predictions are hard to make, especially about the future. It's absolutely true. The world is a very complex, chaotic place. There's a lot of different things going on. Only after the fact can you go back and reconstruct some simple linear pathway of how we got there, the pathway to 9/11 and so on. But that's only after the fact. We're really good at that. I mean, like in our own lives, we look back at how we got to where we are in our lives, and we construct this simple linear path, but at any given point, you don't know what's going to happen, and therefore it's so hard to predict.
The Skeptics Society, what is that?
The Skeptic Society is the 501c3 nonprofit organization that published Skeptic Magazine, and we have the webpage skeptic.com. We're a science education organization. We're based out of Caltech in Pasadena, California, and we put on lecture series, we sponsor scientific conferences. Like we had one this year on global warming and the greenhouse effect, environmental skepticism. Should we be skeptical? What about peak oil, overpopulation? So we deal with a lot of topics, not just the fringe paranormal kind of stuff, but also these kinds of loaded political issues. That is where science and politics meets is a particularly hot area for us. Our next conference at Caltech next year is probably going to be on war and terrorism. I mean, there's a lot of interesting scientific research now on why people fight, why groups attack each other, why terrorists did it. A lot of research on the psychology of the terrorists, by the way. I mean, they talk about, you know, couldn't have been the terrorists who did this. Of course they did it. I mean, we have a lot of terrorists that have been caught affiliated with, well, not only with 9/11, but with all the attacks in the 1990s that Clinton had to deal with. And a lot of those guys are in jail, and they've been interviewed. There's a Harvard professor that wrote a terrific book, Terror in the Name of God, who talks about why they do this, why they hate us. The idea that Bush was motivated to do this and the Al-Qaeda Islamic fundamentalist terrorists would not do it is ridiculous. Listen to their own words. They would do it. They would do it in a heartbeat. They were delighted when they heard about these captured prisoners. Were delighted when they heard about 9/11. That this was terrific. They wish they could have done it. So I mean, we should take these people at their word. If they, you know, that if the motivation is there, it's there, and they say it is.
There's a new book out called Why Darwin Matters by Michael Shermer. He is on the road. He's in Denver this morning on a book tour. We go to Seattle, Washington. You're on the air.
Dr. Shermer, I'm thrilled to talk to you guys.
Thank you. Good morning.
I was wondering, I had a specific question about, you were asked about where the planes went, and you mentioned that the gas chambers. I wondered, where did you hear anything about that?
Oh, one of the early conspiracy theories had the plane going either to, well, the first story was that the plane was flown into Canada somewhere, and the passengers were gassed. Then the second story, the more current one now that's in this film, is that the flight actually landed in Chicago, at Chicago O'Hare, no less, and that the patients were then hustled off into a holding chamber, and there they disappeared. So in the new conspiracy, it doesn't say gas, but just disappeared. Well, you know, what are you going to do with them? I mean, the people are gone. The family members, obviously, of these people are mourning their death. So where are they? I mean, surely they didn't fly them off to Siberia somewhere. They would have had to be killed. And the people who did the killing, somebody has to do it, right? Not one of them is coming forward to say, man, have I got a story for you. Larry King Live, I'm the guy who did it. I got the orders from the Bush administration or something like that. Again, you see that that people that used to work in the Bush administration that have now left or were fired have gone on, typically every one of them, they go on these talk shows, they write books, they're on the lecture circuit, just telling the whole story, everything they know about who said what to whom and when. Don't you think that would happen if these guys were involved in something orders of magnitude bigger than the controversy over, say, the invasion of Iraq?
Mr. Shermer, would you share your political leanings with us?
Oh, well, as I like to say, I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a libertarian.
And
the problem with libertarians is we don't generally like big organized political parties, so that's part of our shortcomings, I'm afraid. But I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal would be the right way to say that.
did you vote for George Bush?
I voted Libertarian in both of the elections. Actually, I voted Libertarian in the first election, and the second election I decided to vote for Kerry simply because I didn't think the Libertarian candidate had a chance and I didn't want to throw away my vote.
Jacksonville, Florida, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. I don't have a conspiracy theory. I'm just skeptical of the official version. And you, Mr. Shermer, can't have it both ways either. You keep saying that how could they keep it quiet in this great big bureaucracy, but you also say that it was done by 19 people. So, you know, it didn't have to be the whole government doing it. But what my question is about, why are the passenger lists from the airlines, why are they classified, and why did they pick up the film from the gas station across the street, things like that, and classify that? And where are the pieces of the airplane? I know when that plane went down off of Long Island, they went down onto the ocean and got up every piece and reassembled it in the hangar, and it was all over the news, and we saw it. Where's the plane? Where are the pieces?
Right. When a plane impacts the water, that's bad enough, but at least it doesn't shatter into a million little pieces. If you hit a concrete structure, like the Pentagon, which is a pretty high integrity, sturdy building, the plane just disintegrated in a million little pieces. Again, I mentioned earlier I had a friend that worked there. He's in the military, and he ran out to the lawn and he was holding pieces in his hand of the airplane, clearly identifiable pieces. And don't forget, we have eyewitness accounts of people that said, I saw an American Airlines logo on the tail of the plane that came through. So, admittedly, the footage that the government has released is not helpful. All you see is just one frame of a little tube-like thing and then the explosion. But the eyewitnesses themselves said they saw what was a passenger jet. They saw American Airlines logos on it. I mean, it's not like they're going to mistake something else for that. You can hardly miss it. And it turns out that there is a long, flat, clear area leading right up to it. And at that speed, you could easily knock down light poles, no big deal. It's not going to rip the wing off, and go straight into the building and then just essentially disintegrate.
Michael Shermer, where are you from originally?
Oh, I'm from Southern California, born and raised, and my home is in Pasadena. It's a lovely area to live. I went to school in Southern California, and yeah, so that's it.
Fairfax, Virginia, good morning.
Good morning. Voted for John Kerry. I guess you already wasted your vote, but anyway, I think all this goes back to, this all goes back to Bill Clinton looking in the camera, lying to the world, and the Democrats just won't let go of it. And they'll do anything they can, say anything, come up with any concocted idea so that they can try to get after George W. Bush. Now, I admit this war is a joke, but, you know, let's not give too much fuel to that book that liberal thinking is a mental illness. Thank you.
I'm afraid I don't know that book, but I haven't heard that one. Well, so, I mean, I think this is one of the things that's sort of disturbing about the 9/11 conspiracy theories is that, in fact, there's plenty of room for legitimate criticism of the Bush administration on any number of fronts, including the business about the warnings that we might have had in the summer of 2001, including that famous memo from Condoleezza Rice that Osama bin Laden will strike on American soil on that, I think it was August 8th. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think are legitimate criticisms that should be discussed. It's when you take it to the far extreme that it just becomes absurd.
Our next call is Charlotte, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. going back to the suspects, I'm looking right now at the BBC News World Edition.
Yes.
I'm looking at an article right now where it shows some of the suspects. And I suggest people to go there and look at it. At the end of the article, it says the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, acknowledged on Thursday the identity of several of the suicide hijackers is in doubt. So I wonder who were the people that you were talking at BBC denying
I don't know.
article that they actually are displaying on their website.
I don't know. We'll have to check that out. I'm not sure. I don't know what you're looking at there, so I'll have to check that out later.
It's http news.bbc.co.uk
Okay, there you go.
/middle_east/1559.151.stm.
So they're saying that Mohammed Atta is still alive?
No, they're showing, like I say, they show, I think it's Mali al-Sharif left the U.S. a year ago, he says. But it's actually two of the actually 19 suspects. Two of them are actually showing there as actually being alive. One of them shows that he's in Casablanca, Morocco. But I suggest people to go to the BBC News and look at it and read it.
Well, I mean, if our forces are trying to find Osama bin Laden and we have a hit list of all the top Al-Qaeda people we're trying to get, and if that were true, if the BBC had published, here they are, this is the guy, and he's living in Morocco, go get him. Why has this not happened? See, that's why I suspect there's something else going on here, some sort of mistaken identity, or the news story didn't get it right. I don't know. I haven't seen that particular story you're looking at. So anyway,
Bob Novak will join us at the top of the hour from Urbana, Illinois. We go to Ashland, Oregon. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Boy, there's so much to this. I love your magazine, and I'm also a libertarian. Let me make this concise. Each floor of the World Trade Center weighed 3,200,000 pounds. Gravity pulling at 32 feet per second. That means that the one that was hit at the 95th floor, if that's 5 floors, would have exerted upon it 50,945,274 foot-pounds of energy every second. The other one would have 1,018,905,480 foot-pounds of energy every second. So the fire is incidental. It doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned, because once a structure has been damaged by a plane going X miles per hour, which probably hit with 1 billion foot-pounds of energy, we know that it caused the seismographs to be reacted 20 miles away. So when you do the science, this guy that that says he's a physics professor and doesn't come up with this basic stuff that I learned as a hobby doing ballistics when I was 12 years old, can't understand why the building came down with the force of gravity. This is really absurd. As far as
Thank you.
Right? I mean, it's nuts. And
Yes.
and I watched that film. It was insensitive to the people that suffered. It was horrible. In fact, I have a TV show. I'm sending a copy, community access. I'm sending a copy of what I did to BYU, for Brigham Young University, as soon as I can get a copy of it. Because these people need to know this kind of a person does not need to be teaching children about science
Yes.
when he doesn't even apply it himself.
Talking about Stephen Jones?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Shermer.
Yeah, I mean, his point is well made that the demolition experts that have published on why the buildings collapsed point out that if it were a controlled demolition, when they bring a building down, they bring it down from the bottom up, and if you look at the videotape, you'll see the building collapses right at the point of impact. And there was a terrific NOVA program last week in which they and this is a tribute to how science works. They said we were wrong when we did the first program 2 years ago, Why the Buildings Fell. We thought that the supporting beams had weakened and sagged and caused the bolts to snap that held the supporting beams to the side of the building. In fact, that's not what happened. Apparently, the bolts did not snap. That the supporting beams sagged because of the heat of the flames. Never did melt. They didn't break. They just sagged, pulling in the sides of the building 5 feet on each side. at the point where the plane impact, that point where the building was being pulled in, that's where the collapse occurred. And you can see it clearly on the videotape when you show it slow motion. It happens exactly at that point. There are no explosions below that. There are no squibs going off, and then it goes down. It goes down right at that point where the plane hit, which is exactly what you'd expect. And as the caller said, all that huge amount of weight above it cascades down and the floors collapse one after another at real-time speed.
Michael Shermer is our guest. He's the publisher of Skeptic Magazine. By the way, how do people get that?
People can get Skeptic. Well, it's carried at all Barnes & Noble and Borders and Books A Million. All bookstores carry Skeptic. Or, of course, you can just go to skeptic.com and order it there. It's a science magazine, but we also deal a lot with these kinds of fringe issues, politically loaded, religiously loaded controversies, all related to science and conspiracies.
Manhattan, New York, you're on.
Yes, good morning. My question has to do with the idea that it's more likely the conspiracy theory that could possibly happen. It's not that Bush himself or the government orchestrated the attacks, which I think is very far-fetched, but that Bush actually had some knowledge prior to the attacks that a terrorist attack was imminent, and he used and ignored the information similar to the, I think the best example would be the presidential daily briefing of August 6th, where it said bin Laden was determined to strike in the U.S., and he didn't raise security levels in New York or Washington. Do you think that the conspiracy theory that he allowed it to happen as a pretext to implement foreign policy indicated in the Project for the New American Century is a legitimate one and has any cause for validity?
No, I don't. Again, I think we have the problem of the hindsight bias, going back after the fact, knowing what happened, and looking at all the clues that they should have seen at the time. Why can't we today know where the terrorists are going to attack next? When they do, we'll go back and after the fact go, oh, dang, we should have seen that coming. Look, there was that clue, but at the time you don't see it. Again, with the Pearl Harbor analogy, after the fact, when we know that they struck Hawaii, you can go back and kind of figure out, oh yeah, we should have seen that coming. But really, at the time, all the clues pointed to the Japanese were going to attack somewhere in the Philippines, that they were going to go south, not east. And so, again, it's the problem of the hindsight bias. We hold people accountable for foreknowledge that they could not possibly have had. And we have to remember it's a very chaotic, complex world we live in. It's not simple and linear like it is in history when we go back and reconstruct it. Then it looks simple and linear.
Here's an email that goes through 3 different points from an M. Walters of Valparaiso, Indiana. Dear Mr. Shermer, what I wanted to know is, 1, since our administration has insisted it was a plane that hit the Pentagon, why did the FBI remove the surveillance tapes from the surrounding buildings near the Pentagon and instead keep them to show exactly what hit the Pentagon? Yes, I do wonder where Flight 77 would be had it not been it hit the Pentagon, but the FBI removing the surveillance tapes is rather odd, not to mention where were the Pentagon's defense mechanisms?
Right. Well, the Pentagon doesn't have defense mechanisms for shooting down passenger planes. In fact, it wasn't even clear that the rules of engagement for dealing with passenger planes could have been handled within that 1-hour time frame in which all this unfolded that morning. As for the surveillance tapes, how do these people know that there are surveillance tapes from the mall next door and from the gas station and so on that people talk about? How do they know that there's these videotapes? Where did they get this information? I've never seen anything about that to then conclude that the Pentagon ran over and took the tapes and they're not showing them. I mean, it's possible that they have tapes and the Pentagon is holding them for national security reasons. Who knows? I mean, we have to remember, does the government ever cover things up and not tell us everything? Yeah, of course. Happens all the time. But that doesn't mean there's something nefarious going on. Same thing like with the Roswell UFO story, that somehow the government's covering something up. Well, they were covering something up. That, in fact, we were conducting high-altitude experiments to test, to detect whether the Soviets were exploding nuclear bombs in the upper atmosphere. But they're not going to tell the American people that in 1947, so they made up a story. So, yeah, sometimes stories are made up, but they're usually made up for very mundane reasons that have little to do with grand conspiracies of UFOs and 9/11 attacks by the Bush administration.
Fort Dodge, Iowa, you're next.
Yes, good morning. On another subject, there's a book which I thought had a good case written by Jana Davis, an Oklahoma City news lady, who speaks of the third terrorist in Oklahoma City, John McVeigh's missing Latino-type person that we were searching for immediately after that as being an Iraqi. And throughout her book, she makes a pretty strong case that there were lots of Iraqis associated with McVeigh.
Timothy McVeigh, yes, I have heard this as well, and I am a bit curious about that. That seems possible to me, that McVeigh could have had some input, some help, some direction from Islamic professional terrorists, maybe for his own motives, maybe they were using him. I don't think this has ever been proved, but I also don't think it's been pursued very deeply. I think the law enforcement agencies concluded, probably rightly, that McVeigh, I mean, for sure rightly, that McVeigh did it, because he said he did it, but that there may have been other people involved, and they perhaps closed that case a little too soon. So I do think there's a legitimate inquiry there.
Mr. Shermer, where does the Skeptics Society get its money?
We're a nonprofit, so we do accept donations. Primarily, we're funded, however, through subscriptions to the magazine. We keep all the back issues of the magazine in print, so people buy them. Each issue has a particular theme to it, like conspiracies or global warming or UFOs or whatever. So we're funded by that. We have a lecture series at Caltech every month, once or twice a month, and annual conferences, so we videotape or film those, and those are all available at skeptic.com. So, I mean, we've had a terrific lineup of speakers over the last 15 years. Some of the greatest scientists in the world have spoken for us, and so that's how we do it. We also we have a catalog of books, really interesting books, sort of skeptics books, but, you know, science books on any number of topics, you know, Carl Sagan's books and James Randi's books and Bill Nye the Science Guy's books, and, you know, so that's primarily our source of funding.
2 calls, and we'll change topics. We go next to Rochester, New York. You're on the air.
Mr. Shermer, 2 specific questions about the Pentagon. Why was there no wing damage on the building of the Pentagon? And 2, if the plane at the Pentagon disintegrated without leaving a trace, how did it maintain the structural integrity to punch 3 clean holes through reinforced concrete steel?
Okay, these are good questions. The reason people are asking about why there was no wing damage is because they saw the wing damage in the World Trade Center, which had glass. So the wings could punch through the glass before they disintegrate upon hitting the metal structures inside. In the case of the Pentagon, this is concrete. So when the wings hit, the wings are aluminum. They're super lightweight. These are composite materials inside, and they just disintegrate into a million little pieces. And again, I've mentioned this several times now. My friend who worked at the Pentagon ran out there, and there were pieces of the plane all over the place. He held them in his hand. And so it's not true that there's no debris. There was lots of debris. It was just fragmented into tiny little parts. And yet there were some holes punched clearly where the part of the fuselage, which is a much stronger reinforced composite material, and of course the engines also helped drive the hole a little bit deeper.
Last call for our Mr. Shermer. We go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Shermer. I was wondering what you think of Flight 800 over Long Island, and also the plane that exploded over Rockaway right after 9/11. Thank you.
Right. I don't know about the Rockaway one. I've not looked into any of that. The Flight 800, I've seen what everybody else has seen, all the documentaries on it, and and so on. It appears that the fuel tank, the empty fuel tank with the fumes in it, that a spark ignited it. That does seem to be the cause. There was some conspiratorial thinking around that perhaps a missile shot it down. But there seems to be no evidence of that. I mean, obviously the people investigated it, considered that hypothesis, and looked into it and found no evidence of a missile impact or anything like that. And why anybody would, the American government would want to shoot down an airline like that. Is, what's the motive? So that doesn't make sense to me.